How does memory work, and is forgetting a good thing? Novelist Brian Faulkner wrote that we are our memories, that's all we are. That's what makes us the person we are. Memory can be a collection of things we've done, people we've met, and knowledge that we've learnt. Atkinson and Shiffrin used various ideas about the structure of memory to compose the modal model of memory. This became extremely influential and is still the foundation of memory today. Over time, other psychologists adapted this structure through further research. Memories are first entered into the brain as sensory input. This is the information we take from what is happening around us, whether it's visually or auditorily. This is then firstly stored in our sensory memory. The first step has a large capacity to be able to hold all necessary and unnecessary information. For example, the wind blowing, and also the person standing in front of you having a conversation. Due to its large capacity, the sensory memory, however, can only hold information for a short amount of time. This is unless attention is given. Once attention is given to a piece of iconic memory or echoic memory, then this will be transferred to the next step, working or short-term memory. The working memory is different than the sensory memory, as in this stage the information is being processed and thought about. This stage also has limited capacity, and the information can only be briefly stored. If, however, the person actively repeats this information in order to remember it, then it can remain in the working memory longer than the suggested 30 seconds. This is known as maintenance rehearsal. Maintenance rehearsal is the way to increase the chance of the memory being encoded into the long-term memory store. Craig and Lockhart, however, argue that there are two types of rehearsal that can be implemented by the working memory. One is maintenance rehearsal, and the other, they suggest, is elaborative rehearsal. This type of rehearsal has the person link the material to an already established memory, which will make future retrieval easier. For example, if you are trying to remember facts for a test, you could assign each fact a room in your house. By using this already established visuospatial memory of the layout of your house, retrieving the facts for the test can become easier. Craig and Lockhart argued that elaborative rehearsal created a deeper process of memory compared to maintenance, and so felt that the former was better at enhancing delayed long-term learning. The final store within the modal memory model is the long-term memory. This is the main store of memory where working memory is encoded into an argued unlimited capacity for an unlimited duration. The more effectively the memory is encoded, the more likely it is to remain in the long-term memory, and the easier it is to retrieve this memory. There are two types of long-term memory, explicit and implicit. Implicit memory is mainly known as non-declarative, which means that these memories don't need to be recalled, they are non-conscious. Examples of implicit memories are tasks and emotions, such as driving a car. You don't have to think about doing them, they are just there. So you know how to complete a task or how to feel about a situation. The opposite to this is explicit memory, which is conscious. These memories are the ones we have to think about to recall. An example of explicit memory are events such as what you had for dinner 2 nights ago, or what you did for your last birthday. Within the long-term memory store is a number of different types of memory, one being autobiographical memory. Bernstein and Rubin define autobiographical memory as a conscious ability to recall personal events. The study of autobiographical memory has only recently become more researched, as before many psychologists were sceptical that it could not be accurately tested due to the individual differences between subjects. However, the more research that was done into autobiographical memory, the more it was found to impact psychology, not only in terms of memory research, but in other areas also. For example, clinical psychology, social and personality psychology, neuropsychology, ageing, and even comparative psychology. Conway proposed a theory of autobiographical memory in which he presents a flowchart explaining how the two components, episodic memory and autobiographical knowledge or life story, are processed in order to recall and store autobiographical memories. In Conway's example, he shows how a person may split themselves into two or more self-images. In his figure 5, as you can see, he splits into working and relationships. Conway then goes on to explain how the autobiographical knowledge will then split this theme into certain events, activities, other people, locations, and goals that you may have assigned to this particular event. Each of these is then linked to a specific episodic memory, which can then be retrieved from the long-term memory store. This type of memory is extremely important for shaping who we are. It allows us to grow from our past and think about what we want to do in the future. But does forgetting aid or hinder this? Furthermore, what would happen if you could never forget any of these memories? Forgetting, although assumed as a negative when considering memory, is actually extremely beneficial to our cognitive minds and its functioning. In psychological research, forgetting is the inability to retrieve a memory that was stored in the long or short-term memory. There are two main opposing theories on how and why we forget. Interference theory, firstly proposed by Jenkins and Dallenbach, and decay theory, proposed by Thorndike. Hermann Ebbinghaus conducted a study which found that remembering words without meaning became harder over time. Thorndike took this concept and named it decay theory. The main argument of decay theory is that forgetting happens simply because, over time, our brain will lose things that we are no longer working on in our memory. This theory was established a decade before interference theory. However, decay theory lost its backing due to psychologists discovering time itself was not the only factor that influenced forgetting. Jenkins and Dallenbach proposed an alternative to the opposing decay theory. They proposed that it was not the passing of time that led to memories being lost, but that it was the materials and acts the mind did within that time frame that interfered with memory. Jenkins and Dallenbach, to explore this theory, specifically looked at the measurement of interference between participants who slept after being given something to remember versus participants who remained awake. They found that those who remained awake did forget more than those who slept. Therefore, Jenkins and Dallenbach argued that this was due to those who slept not having anything to interfere with the stimuli. If decay theory was using this study, they would expect to find no difference as the participants both went through the same amount of time. This further proved their hypothesis that it wasn't simply time that led to forgetting, but also what the brain does within that time and how it is affected. Interestingly, however, when this study was replicated by Newman in 1939, he did not find a significant difference between the two conditions. This does call into question the previous study. However, Newman's study did technically still find those who slept recalled more, 47%, compared to those who remained awake, 36%, therefore still giving evidence to support interference theory. Consequently, due to its ambiguous nature, there are two types of interference: proactive interference and retroactive interference. Proactive interference is when a memory already stored in the brain interferes with the memory trying to be encoded, whereas retroactive interference is when a new memory interferes with an already established one. Interference has also been split into two schools of thought: changed trace hypothesis and multiple trace hypothesis. Changed trace hypothesis was propositioned by Skaggs, who argued that interference occurs when new stimulus affects the solidification of previous memory and will replace it. On the other hand, McGough was the first proponent of multiple trace hypothesis, which suggests that if multiple stimuli are given, then those that are more similar to previous memory traces will interfere with the retrieval of the correct stimulus. Many studies have been done into each of these hypotheses, but none have succeeded in establishing the more accurate hypothesis. William James said, "Forgetting is as important a function as recollecting. If we remembered everything, we should on most occasions be as ill off as if we remembered nothing." In other words, being able to remember everything about your life is not always a positive. The majority of this information is pointless. However, there are 12 people in the world known to have a super-autobiographical memory, or hyperthymesia. In Greek, this translates to hyper, excessive, thymesis, remembering. These 12 people can recollect pretty much every day of their lives without any hesitation. It's called super-autobiographical memory, as the only type of memory they exhibit to recall is things like events, images, dates, and even conversations. Psychologists are still unsure as to why some people have this ability. However, some biological research suggests there is a slight difference in brain structure between those who have hyperthymesia and those who do not. It is not considered as a handicap, and even though of having this ability means remembering all the traumatic or sad lifetime events vividly, they are also able to remember every birthday, holiday, and other exciting happy events. Those who have hyperthymesia have said they would not get rid of the ability if they could. So even though James suggests it is a pointless ability, those who have it would not feel themselves without it. The problem with research around hyperthymesia is that there are so few cases that research is extremely limited. Also, it is argued that because the information is autobiographical, most of it is personal experiences and are therefore hard to validate. Even though more research is needing to be done, it is interesting that 12 people have this ability, but the majority of them are not suffering from cognitive overload as previously hypothesized, as well as none showing the want to get rid of their ability. Overall, we can see that memory is what makes us who we are, even if that person is someone who may forget things or someone who cannot. Forgetting is deemed by psychologists as being healthy. It saves the brain from having a cognitive overload. Autobiographical memory is mostly very personal, and therefore is hard to validate in both cases of everyday memory and super-autobiographical memory. The only way psychologists have been able to prove this is by using historical events to illustrate the amount of detail a person with super-autobiographical memory has versus a person who does not. Remembering events and people is essential to our personalities. However, so is forgetting. Forgetting can help us forget things we do not want to remember and the minuscule things that are not important or relevant to us. Forgetting, therefore, is as important to the human brain as memory is.